Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our final day here in April in Galloway, New Jersey for the Mid-Atlantic Council meeting. Let's get started with our agenda, business section going on. Start with our SSC report. Dr. Paul Rago, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. I will be going over the March 18th to 19th SSC report, and the information is covered in detail under tab 7. Next slide, please. The outline of what we did at the meeting, we reviewed the state of the ecosystem, covered information on ecosystem approaches to fisheries management, and examined the CEFI, or the Climate Ecosystems and Fisheries Initiative. I'll touch on each of those very briefly and have more detailed slides if people have additional questions. We also did a review or examined the report of the Recreational Tilefish Reporting Program, and then went to a review and summary of a number of subcommittees that the SSC has conducting, not only on short-term projections and the joint blue line tilefish assessment, as well as, a specific request for consideration of separate OFLs and ABCs for commercial and recreational fisheries. Now, I have some new software, and like all new software, it has suggestions. It has an AI assistant who's kind of got frustrated with my deadly dull style here. So the next slide, please, is the format suggested by the co-pilot artificial intelligence here for status of the ecosystem. Now, the problem with this, of course, is you can't read it, and there's sort of like some meaningless blocks of information. So I decided to reject that, and I also came to the determination that there is relatively little risk of artificial intelligence replacing AI or replacing the SSC at this point. So next slide, please. Under the state of the ecosystem, the SSC appreciated the thoroughness of the report and its ongoing commitment to improving the information available to the Council. We emphasized that the continuation of such information for future decisions was really a high priority by the SSC. One of the highlights was that the newly developed climate models suggest a pause in warming over the next 6 to 7 years, and the cooler than expected temperatures in the mid-Atlantic in 2024 are in fact consistent with these. One difference this year in our review is that we had a set of terms of reference which were designed to elicit more specific information on the nature and scope of indices, what could be done about profit indicators and some of the problems experienced there, and then finally on recommendations on ocean forecasts. A lot of these are in the report, and I do have backup slides if we want to touch on some of those specific recommendations later. Next slide, please. The ecosystem approach to fisheries management continues to advance. The ESPs, or ecosystem and socioeconomic profiles, have been used for bluefish, black sea bass, and golden tilefish assessments, and they will be incorporated into additional ones as the research track process advances. And also the ecosystem information will be incorporated into future fishery information and performance reports by the Council. So we were very positive about those. Next slide, please. We did hear a presentation on the Climate Ecosystems and Fisheries Initiative. This is a rather advanced modeling project with a focus on developing information specifically for use in fisheries. So a new model known as the Modular Ocean Model 6, or MOM6, who said these guys don't have a sense of humor. It's really the first of its kind for general use, and one of the key features of this, it has not only a much finer spatial scale, but it's also able to create seasonal forecasts for up to 3-month periods. And both of these aspects are much more consistent with what is used in stock assessment models. So this should be useful for forecasting, particularly when we're talking about forecasts that have environmental components in them. So we were very positive about those aspects. Next slide, please. Next, we turned our attention to the recreational tilefish permitting and the report of the consultants. And we really appreciated the detailed review by the partners and the contractor team, and that it really was an exhaustive kind of examination of what some of the underlying properties of that of the program thus far has been. We did have a number of concerns and suggestions. One was more a clarification of what the long-term objectives are. In particular, we felt it was necessary to explore what the sampling properties of this program are. It was designed to be a census, but in fact, it's a sampling or a survey that we really don't have a good handle on. And one of the primary reasons for that is that it has a very low reporting rate. So if it is to be useful in future stock assessments, it will be really essential to figure out what are the sampling properties of the existing program. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we had a number of subcommittees that we have assembled over the past 6 months, and some of them are ongoing. We have an overfishing limit and coefficient of variation. We call this the OFLCV. And, we had a specific request to review the performance of short-term projections for management. Now, by context, the projections are based on forecasts from assessment models, and these rely on two things. First, the parameters estimated within the model, so selectivity patterns, the average weights, the maturation, the set of recruitments coming in. And then you need to apply a set of assumptions related to initial and future conditions, because you complete the assessment, you then have to that break between the assessment and the recommendation process. So among those are the magnitude of catches expected between the last year of the assessment and the first year of the management action. So that's the bridge year. The second part is the expected recruitment in the forecast period. And then finally, there are a number of things which in some assessments are showing differences and trends in biological parameters, particularly average weight. So to address this is a big task, and NRCC has developed a research track working group specifically to look at projections, and that process will not be complete until the fall of 2027. But along the way, the SSC will collaborate, and in fact, one of our members is in fact also on the research track working group. So there will be a lot of interaction with the SSC in terms of accomplishing this performance review. Next slide, please. On a more short-term time schedule, the Council has requested the SSC to provide guidance on standardizing projection assumptions and outputs. And so we have a working group, and we'll be charged with providing some suggestions to the center for the May management tracks, and which will then subsequently be reviewed by peer review in June, and then under consideration by the SSC in July. I just noted that a council member who attended our SSC meeting noted that it's really going to be important to enhance the communication with the council about the differences between these two initiatives, well, the longer term one in terms of projection performance, and the second one related to more standardization of the current projections. So just wanted to, those nuanced differences will be difficult to convey, and we will try to do a better job along the way here in terms of what we're recommending, and appreciate the collaboration with our colleagues at the center. The next slide, please. As you know, blue line tilefish is one of our more challenging assessments. We both the Mid-Atlantic and the South Atlantic councils manage blue line tilefish, but the Mid-Atlantic jurisdiction begins at the border. The South Atlantic takes the lead for the assessments through the CDAR process, and CDAR 92 will update this in later this year using the same modeling framework as before. Now, to participate in this, there's a working group of scientific and management staff from both councils that will apply the data limited methods, or DLM, for estimating appropriate harvest rates. So a peer review of this is scheduled for late April, and the results will be considered by us at the SSC in the May meeting. So, and we will then be applying the council risk policy to recommend levels for, what fraction for that fraction of the stock north of the Virginia, North Carolina border. Next slide, please. Our other working group is designed to address the sector-specific OFLs and ABCs. And in December, the council asked us to develop a white paper on the scientific considerations to developing separate OFLs and ABCs for the commercial and recreational sectors for summer flounder, scup, and black sea bass. This was first addressed at our meeting, and then we subsequently had a subcommittee meeting on March 31st. Very pleased to have one of our newest members, Young Chen, will be one of our members. Mark Holliday, Mike Wilberg, and Tom Miller will be joining me on staff. And then we also greatly appreciate the staff support from Julia Beatty. So let's get right into it. There's, like they say, next slide, please. There's never a good time to kick a hornet's nest, but so let's start with some of the basic issues here. One of the overarching principles is that any scientific basis for ABC allocation really has got to avoid the conflation of scientific and management prerogatives. So, just keep church and state separate under this process. The assessment models, as currently structured for these three stocks, can be used as a scientific basis for allocation of OFLs to commercial and recreational sectors. This is a function of the mathematical structure of those assessment models, and by that I mean they have separate selectivity patterns for commercial and recreational components. So an analytic solution for allocation of OFLs is more consistent with the underlying model structure and the assumptions associated with that. The important point is that if this is done, those allocations may differ from the existing allocations codified in fishery management plans. Next slide, please. So any changes to the existing procedures are going to require some exploration of a lot of moving parts and potentially unintended consequences. And so, the analytical work necessary to address this is yet to be determined, and that will be what we flesh out over the next several months. So just to give you a little bit of insight into how this thing is, we're conceptualizing it at this point. The next slide shows the current process here. And so you begin with an OFL up the top there. That is derived from the assessment model. The SSC applies the process by which we derive the coefficient of variation for that OFL, and applies the Counsel's risk policy, and derives an ABC. So this is what I've, above the red line, the red dashed line is under the scientific uncertainty umbrella. Now that split that occurs, so P proportion goes to the commercial, and the 1 minus P goes to the recreational. That is codified under various amendments and management plans, and therein you enter into the realm of the management domain here. So the recreational ACL is then reduced to the annual catch target, applying the management uncertainty, and then finally the recreational harvest level or limit is derived by subtracting out the estimated dead discards. We had obviously some very extensive discussion yesterday on this exact process, particularly this right-hand column of the flow chart. So if we were to translate to a scientific basis, that would be the next slide, please. You can see a number of things. One, the range of duties under the science thing, the pink shading or there changes. So the basis for partitioning could then be the partitioning induced or derived from the assessment model. So call that P mod and 1 minus P mod. So now you have an OFL component, which is a commercial and recreational one. The risk policy and CV would need to be applied to both of those quantities. And the process by which that is done is not yet known, and there's may likely be a lot of discussion on the science side as to whether this is possible. If it is possible, what's it going to cost? By cost, I mean in terms of what analytical tasks are necessary to justify it. But at that point, you would have a ABC associated with the recreational and an ABC associated with the commercial. It would then enter into the management process, and there the same process as before would take place. It would be reduced by management uncertainty if appropriate, and then subtracting off the estimate of dead discards. Now, where this friction starts to occur is that the codified levels, the P, under the FMPs, the original proportional allocation may differ, is likely to differ from that which is established by the model derivation. So the next slide, there's a number of key questions that have to be addressed, and this is kind of our working list of things that we'll be addressing over a period of time. So much like your discussions yesterday about the option 3 versus 4, the analytic solution for an OFL by sector is more consistent with the exploitations that are currently observed in the fishery, and as I noted, they could differ from those previously agreed upon or derived or distilled by management decisions. So, and an additional twist on this is that they could vary between assessments depending on the updating, the model configurations, and so forth. So, for the council, it's does it have the capacity to address these allocations issues on a regular basis? The council policy, the overall arching umbrella that guides decisions, was not developed under the concept of two fisheries with different selection patterns. So this is likely to require some additional simulations, and the question of who and how is always kind of paramount there. Next slide, please. Some of this sort of begs the question as to whether or not the sector-specific ABCs and ACLs should be done via the scientific process by assigning potentially different CVs to the recreational and commercial catch limits, or is this more appropriately under the purview of management? So, we'll be trying to flesh out that question. We haven't reached any determinations, and that, in fact, is more in the domain of the council purview rather than the SSC. And then the huge looming problem is that all the while this is being done, there are potential effects of the recalibrations that will be under consideration later this year in 26. So next slide, please. There are also some costs to the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. There's going to be need for changes in the assessment software and some standardized reports. And so that given current resource constraints and reductions, this may be an issue. And then are there any socioeconomic factors that should be considered? Again, that takes it out of the realm of the stock assessment science, but it does have an important bearing on the factors that end up ultimately being used by the council for establishing that. So I wanted to give you an early indication or a flavor of where the sets of discussions that we've had thus far have been going. So we're going to be meeting over the next few months, and we'll report our findings to the full SSC in May and finalize that by September. There will be a white paper presented to the council in the coming by December of 2025. So the next steps under this process, we're going to meet, and again, this is redundant with what I just said, but the draft white paper will be available to the SSC in September, and then finally we'll have a white paper to the council by December. So that concludes my presentation. Next slide, please. This is what the AI assistant co-pilot suggested for my last slide here, so it wasn't too bad. And so if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them. I do have additional backup slides if there are additional questions about our SOE recommendations or any couple other slides as well. So thank you for your attention, and happy to address anything that may have arisen.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions, comments? Michelle Duvall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me, and thanks, Paul, for the report. I guess one good luck on fleshing out the white paper on the issue of separate OFLs and ABCs per sector. Is definitely an interesting discussion, and I think you've given us a lot of things to think about that perhaps folks hadn't considered before. So definitely look forward to hearing more about that. And then my question was, when you all received the presentation from on the state of the ecosystem report, and there were some comments on the use of forecasts and how, having those forecasts on, I think specifically ocean temperatures a few years ahead of time could be helpful for projections, especially those that have a dependency on water temperature as a predictor of year class strength. And so, I mean, could you talk a little bit more about that, like how those could be integrated and to what degree those are integrated right now? And of course, I'm thinking specifically about like black sea bass.
Right. Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, they're the most sort of embedded component for the use of such forecast is black sea bass, where there is a specific link. There have historically been use of relationships for butterfish, and it helped to define the stock assessment, but it wasn't really used in prediction mode. One of the major components of that was that the interannual changes in butterfish, for example, were not significant across years. So although it did have an influence on structuring the availability of the resource to the survey domain, it did not have a large variation across years. Now, where that may change is for in 2024, and perhaps this pause period that's forecast, this pause in the rate of increase may be relevant there. So I do have a slide on that. That's next, maybe 3 slides ahead there, if that's an ocean forecast. But I think thank you. So the utility of these finer scale temporal models is that they would be more commensurate with the stock assessment process. So the 2-year updates and so forth, are sort of right in the ballpark of what the ocean forecasting models could be useful for. The other utility is that these forecasts might be helpful in terms of sort of structuring future research efforts. So if in fact there is a projected cooler than average or non-increasing temperature range, that may be important for several stocks which have strong associations with bottom temperatures, and the flatfish, of course, are a key part of that. So anyhow, it might be one in which these types of models might be more useful. One, from the development of better stock assessment models, and 2, from the focusing of research efforts to start, say, look for the mechanical or the biological and physical processes associated with year class strength. So I hope that answers the question, not too many words. Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, thanks for that, Paul. That's definitely helpful. And I think trying to figure out how to move that information forward, I think in a digestible format that the general public and the fishing public understand and can appreciate when it comes to how that translates into future OFLs and ABCs, as that information is integrated into projections, I think is sort of a little something that we should think about, so that folks understand what is contributing to those future OFLs and specifications.
Exactly. And I might add that a lot of the work and collaborative work that's ongoing for squid, both for ilex and longfin, does in fact involve a lot of very fine scale oceanographic temperatures, fine scale in the physical sense. And so there are, I think, some breakthroughs that might arrive from that, and having a model which can in fact forecast some of those finer scale changes will be, I think, exceptionally useful for model development as well as understanding, fishery performance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions around the table? Seeing none, I'll go to the audience. James Fletcher.
Dr. Rago, could the current recreational models used reflect if the council were to go to total retention, or would new models have to be built? In other words, if the council would go to total retention, as the United National Fishermen has been proposing, would the models reflect that, or would they have to be new models? Thank you for your time and enjoyed the presentation.
Yeah. Thank you, James. Appreciate that. Yeah, the models, the assessment models that would incorporate definitely could incorporate the new information. Now, where the issue arises, a total retention model of all length classes, no discards, etc., would have a different selectivity pattern across age classes. Currently, that selectivity pattern is structured not only by the regulations in terms of size limits and bag limits, but also by the availability of the resource. So the spatial pattern of fishing between inshore and offshore, also affects the selectivity that results as a result of that fishing activity. A change in the selectivity pattern can be accommodated within the models. Now, it takes some time. There's some inertial mass of that process, and it would take several years before the full effect of a major change such as the total retention process would induce. By that I mean, if you're going from a process that is mostly focused on older fish to one that is focused on selectivity across all fish sizes, it will take a little bit of while before those effects are fully embedded within the population size structure. So it's kind of like the pig and the python process here. You don't have all of the not everything is affected instantaneously by the change in the regulations. It takes some time for those full effects to be realized. So I hope that addresses it. So the models could do it, but it'll take some time before it would be able to assess such effects.
Seeing no more hands. Thank you very much, Paul.
Yep. Thank you, Wes. Appreciate it. And good luck.
Let's move on to the Executive Director's Report. Dr. Chris Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. There's a number of items behind the tab that I'm going to talk about this morning. One of them I'm going to get help with. Hayden will be covering one of those items. So Hayden, if you could get settled down at the end of the table while I go through these other ones, that'd be great. The first item behind the tab is the 2025 council meeting topics, the document that you see at every one of our meetings. Note that our next meeting in June is in Virginia Beach. Note that the dates have changed and the hotel has changed. So we did that to accommodate a change in the South Atlantic Council's schedule. We moved our meeting up a week. Note that Hilton Garden Inn is down the street from the Hilton that we usually go to. So don't go to the Hilton thinking that we're going to have the meeting there. It's down the street. It's pretty close. There'll be a number of items that we're going to be dealing with at that meeting. It's going to be an important meeting. Specifications for a number of species will be covered. We'll have a framework that we'll be talking about for spiny dogfish as well. So looking at the schedule now, I would guess that we would start at 1 o'clock on Tuesday of that week. Another thing to note, that's going to be the last meeting for several of our council members, and we're going to have a reception on Skip's boat. So we'll provide more information to folks later on that. One other thing to note, Jason has provided me with some notes regarding monkfish. If you noted the change in our April meeting, we scratched monkfish off of that. That's because we didn't need to have a monkfish discussion at this meeting. The New England Council is going to initiate a framework action next week for specifications for monkfish for FY 26 through 28. I think everyone around the table recognizes that we're involved with monkfish management as well. So that'll be an important species for us to track. The monkfish management track assessment peer reviews in September of this year. We'll have an assessment oversight panel meeting in May to talk about that. There's a number of items that you can find more details on if you go to the New England Council's website or our website to look up monkfish stuff. We also have a research track assessment for monkfish that's starting the 2027 review. The bottom line is that the final 26-28 monkfish specs will be considered by both councils in December of this year. Again, you can go to the New England Council's website and to our website. There's going to be a number of meetings, and all those will be posted on our calendar. Speaking of calendars, the next item behind the tab is the meeting schedule for 2027. Hard to believe, but we actually do have a schedule for 2027 already. I've had very direct conversations with the executive directors of the New England and South Atlantic councils, and we don't expect any changes in anybody's schedule that would change any of those dates for us. So you can take a look at those, put those on your calendar, and plan on that for 2027. The next item behind the tab is a document that you see at every meeting. These are council actions under development, some of which we discussed this week. And you can take a look at that, see if you have any questions. The next item behind the tab, you see framework documents for that summer flounder mesh exemption and work on the surf clam and ocean quag amendment continue. We expect that those packages will be submitted to the National Marine Fisheries Service by the end of April. The next item is the timeline for specifications. Certainly can ask any questions that you might have, or I can answer any questions you might have about that particular document. And I'll stop there, see if there's any questions before I move on. Any questions? Okay, seeing none. The next item behind the tab is something that you saw in an email from me. And this is an update to an infographic that we put together in 2012. Thanks to Mary and Jose for updating that 2012 version to give us a 2025 version. The infographic, I thought it was time for an update. It details important statistics regarding the economic impacts of mid-Atlantic fisheries. It's a good reference document. It's a good outreach tool. So use it as you see fit. Certainly share it with anyone that might be interested. I think we still have some hard copies out on the table if you want to take some hard copies with you. If you find yourself in a situation where you would like more hard copies because you're giving a presentation or you'd like to share with someone, just let us know and we'll get those to you. We've had some questions about it and some comments, which is good, which means that people are actually looking at it. The infographic reflects the 2022 commercial and recreational fisheries data that was published by NOAA Fisheries as of February 25. So it's not data that we make up. Right, it's data that we get from NOAA Fisheries. Also important to note, commercial jobs and sales values are based on domestic harvests. They don't include any seafood imports. We note in the infographic that commercial and recreational marine fisheries in the Mid-Atlantic support jobs, businesses, coastal communities. They provide recreational opportunities and they supply fresh seafood to local and global markets. In 22, fisheries generated $5.5 billion in sales and supported nearly 59,000 jobs across the Mid-Atlantic Council's member states. So again, comments are welcome. Take a look at it. We've already had some comments about some of the little paragraphs underneath the fish that we manage. So take a look at those as well. I'll stop there. Maureen, you have a question? A comment?
Yes. Would we be able to get copies of the infographics as a PDF?
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions? Okay, next item behind the tab is the wind update that Julia puts together for us for every council meeting. A number of items in that particular memo. There's a couple of things to note. One is that we submitted a comment letter in February on the notice of intent to prepare an EIS for the Vineyard Mid-Atlantic project, which is in the New York Bight. We don't anticipate having to do any more comment letters this year. So that's the last one, at least for this year. A few organizations are hosting an in-person virtual workshop in Rhode Island later this month on several issues related to boulder relocation for some of the offshore wind projects. Also important to note, the Regional Fund Administrator that was established by 11 East Coast states continues to develop a compensation claims process that can be used by multiple wind projects. So that's an ongoing thing that we've talked about before. The Clean Air Act permit that was issued to Atlantic Shores was remanded back to the EPA. That's a setback for the project, and it means that that even though it attained all those federal permits, the remand means that they haven't begun construction yet. Some wind developers have laid off staff in recent months due to the federal pause on the permitting process. We don't have a list because those layoffs aren't well publicized. And finally, there is a list of projects which have obtained all their federal permits and may be doing construction or survey activities in the coming months and years. Those projects are largely unimpacted by the recent federal actions because they've already obtained their needed permits. So those are going to happen. The next item behind the tab is a memo from Brandon and Kylie to me regarding IRA projects. We've talked about the IRA projects before. IRA is Inflation Reduction Act. It was passed by Congress in 2022. That act made $20 million available to the regional councils. We were awarded over $2.6 million to fund 8 Mid-Atlantic Council IRA projects. We intend to hire contracts to address all 8 projects. The status of those are summarized in the table. I'm not going to go over the table. Certainly you can take a look and see if you have any questions. Next week, we'll be kicking another RFP out on the street for Project 5, which is operationalizing ecosystem and habitat indicators to support climate-ready fisheries management in the Mid-Atlantic. So this is a topic that we just talked about. So that RFP you'll see shortly. And any questions before I turn it over to Hayden? Okay, seeing none. So the next item is something that I asked Hayden to work on. There's been a pause in some of our protected resource activities, so Hayden had a little time to address something else, and I asked her to take a look at this. Remember at our last meeting, we had a memo in the executive director's report, actually a letter from GARFO to John Mahaly that detailed some specifics related to a request related to his permit. Jim Gilmore asked if there was anything that we could do in response to that particular request. And Hayden's going to tell us the answer to that particular question. So with that, Hayden.
Thanks, Chris. So I'm just going to provide a very brief overview of what was included in the memo that's under the executive director's report for this meeting. And I think the goal here is just to bring this request to the council's attention for potential consideration in the future. Cool. So in recent months, both GARFO and Mid-Atlantic Council staff have been in correspondence with a New York commercial fisherman named John Mahaly. Mr. Mahaly only uses rod and reel gear, and he holds several limited access permits for Mid-Atlantic and New England species, including summer flounder, scup, black sea bass, and groundfish. Okay. So as a limited access permit holder, Mr. Mahaly is subject to limitations on the size and horsepower of vessel replacements and upgrades. Under current regulations for limited access permits in the Northeast, replacements of an existing vessel or upgrades to an existing vessel must be within 10% of the length and 20% of the horsepower of the permit's baseline vessel. And baseline specifications are typically the length and horsepower of a vessel at the time a limited access permit is first issued, or the specifications of the vessel at the time the consistency amendment went into effect, and that date is March 22nd, 1999. So by March 22nd, 1999, Mr. Mahaly had transferred his permits to a smaller vessel, which is 28 feet long with 220 horsepower, and abiding by the regulations that we just discussed. He is limited to replacing his vessel with another vessel that is up to 31 feet in length with 264 horsepower. And he's explained that he's been unable to find a vessel that fits his current fishing needs and abides by the limitations on his permits. So his request is that the council consider eliminating vessel baseline and upgrade restrictions for federal permit holders who fish exclusively with rod and reel for state quota managed species, including summer flounder, scup, and black sea bass. And he points specifically to the limited access hand gear A permit in the Northeast multi-species fisheries as precedent for exempting rod and reel fishermen from these restrictions. And I'll also add that the state quota managed piece comes in because in his letters, he's explained that state permitted vessels, at least in the state of New York, are subject to less restrictions on vessel size and horsepower compared to federally permitted vessels targeting the same species. In the state of New York, commercial vessels are limited to being up to 70 feet long, and there are some exceptions to that, but there are no restrictions on horsepower. He also clarified that he's looking for short-term accommodation to upgrade his vessel beyond the limitations on his permit. So after digging into the relevant regulations, I did not identify any appropriate means for Mr. Mahaly to upgrade his vessel beyond what is currently allowed. So he's limited to a replacement vessel that is 31 feet in length with 264 horsepower. I will note that GARFO does issue exempted fishing permits, but those are time limited and typically only issued for activities that are in support of fisheries related research. So it didn't seem appropriate to recommend that as a path forward. However, in the long term, the council could consider responding to his request by developing a new hand gear permit for rod and reel fishermen exempt from the restrictions we've been discussing, or by modifying existing moratorium permits to include a hand gear category exempt from those restrictions. Of course, one consideration for such a measure is how it would impact relevant stocks. In the memorandum included in the executive director's report, I provide some figures that suggest that a smaller minimal proportion of commercial landings for black sea bass, scup, and summer flounder are attributed to hand gear. So if hand gear effort is not highly correlated to vessel size, exempting hand gear only vessels from baseline and upgrade restrictions may not pose a risk of significantly increasing fishing mortality to these stocks. However, another piece of that equation is permit counts. So with the help of GARFO staff after this memo was finalized, we pulled permit counts for active fluke, scup, and black sea bass permit holders from 2021 to 2024. And active is defined as permit holders that reported landings for these species. Out of an annual average of 403 active permit holders, 76 relied exclusively on hand gear each year. Another consideration is regulatory compatibility. In the same data set, all vessels that used hand gear held other limited access permits. So hypothetically, if moratorium, fluke, scup, and black sea bass permits were exempt from vessel baseline and upgrade restrictions, other limited access permits would still be subject to those restrictions. So it would just nullify the exemption for the fluke, scup, and black sea bass permits. And finally, another consideration is time commitment. The fluke, scup, and black sea bass FMPs specify that permitting restrictions can be recommended to be modified through a framework action. So if the council decided to move forward with some sort of action in response to this request, it could be addressed through a framework, which takes from 6 to 8 months to complete. However, future analysis suggests that the impacts of the suggested actions would be greater than anticipated. Council staff could suggest pursuing this through an amendment, which could take several years to complete. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Hayden. Any questions for Hayden? Yes, Anna.
Sorry, you lost me at one point. So if we gave an exempted, if we exempted him, but he holds another limited entry permit, which he does, then that would nullify the exemption from that permit. You lost me there.
Yeah, so in a permit suite, the most restrictive baseline vessel specifications would apply.
Right, but in his situation, if we went through the process, how would we fix it if he's holding other limited entry permits?
Yes, so in his situation, he does hold a limited access Northeast multi-species permit. So if you exempted fluke, scup, and sea bass from those, the restrictions on the Northeast multi-species would still apply. So it wouldn't fix the issue to exempt him from the requirements under the fluke, scup, and sea bass permits.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, or thank you, Director. Thanks, Hayden. Are there rock solid definitions for what constitutes hand gear, what constitutes rod and reel, what constitutes hook and line? Because you could take all of those and bundle them into a definition where there's a lot of gray area. So hook and line could mean I could put bandit gear, jigging machines on my vessel, and that still be considered hook and line. It could also be considered in some sense rod and reel or hand gear. So I'm just wondering to be careful, because you could set somebody up, an entrepreneur who, you know, goes out and buys a 50-foot boat and puts jigging machines on the boats, and that would somehow fall into a gray area. It's just something to be cognizant of if this moves forward. So just a thought.
We have Jim Gilmore online. Jim?
Thanks, Chris. And first off, thanks for looking into that. I guess the only comment I can make at this point is it's sort of a bit of a catch-22. I think adding to the first option that Mr. Mahali was looking at, it's not that he can't find the vessel. It seems like they don't make that vessel, because I guess back in the 90s, a 31-foot boat with a 200 horsepower engine was not uncommon. Nowadays, he seems to be having minimum horsepower on a vessel that size is over 300 horsepower. So getting a vessel to comply with that is like, may not be attainable. So, and then the second option seems to be a rather convoluted way to, or at least an involved way of actually solving the problem. Doing a framework or something that's going to take that much longer. I think at this point, what I think instead of making or asking to pursue anything, I think we'll try to get Mr. Mahali to talk back with the DEC folks back and see if what's the best way to pursue this to maybe solve his problem, because it's again, we were hoping there was some simpler solution to this, but both of them, well, obviously the first one isn't going to work, and the second one seems to be a lot of work that for an individual situation. So that would be my suggestion at this point. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Megan, you had something?
Thank you, Megan Lap-Seafries. Yeah, I have a question. As I've been thinking about this, do commercial rod and reel permit holders take observers?
Turn to Mike to see, yes, get the answer to that question.
I mean, anybody with a limited access federal permit is in the pool, regardless of the type of gear that they use for carrying observers.
Right. Okay. And follow up to that, I know that on, our vessels or whatever, when you have observers on board, you are required to have life rafts. Is that still a requirement for rod and reel vessels? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks. Just in response to the question that Peter asked about the definitions. So our regulations do define, sorry, I lost it. There are specific definitions for hand gear with respect to the Northeast multi-species fishery, which means handline gear, which is also defined, rod and reel gear, which is also defined, and tub trawl gear, which is also defined. So all of those definitions exist in the regs. they all preclude mechanical means of retrieval explicitly.
Okay, thank you. Michelle.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Hayden. Just one more question. And I apologize if I missed this, but in the further permit research that you were doing, did you just gather information on the characteristics of those other like roughly 75 vessels, like in terms of vessel length and things like that? Like, is this this is one individual's request, but is there the potential for other individuals to come forward just based on what's currently known about their associated vessel lengths with the permits?
All I looked at in the CAMS data was just simply the permit counts for how many vessels used hand line only. So I didn't look into vessel size or any other specific characteristics.
Okay, thank you, Hayden. The long and short is that basically we are going to not deal with anything related to this particular issue in the near term. We'll be talking about it we'll put it in the queue for possible items for our 2026 implementation plan to see how folks want to deal with it. Okay, so any other questions before we move on? Okay, thanks, Hayden. The next item behind the tab relate to the council's SSC. They include letters that we sent to Ed Hood and Dave Secor on your behalf, the council's behalf. Both were longtime serving SSC members. Ed was on the SSC for 44 years and Dave for 15. Also included behind the tab is the response to the letter from both of those individuals. At the last meeting, you approved new membership to the SSC. This list that you see behind the tab is the complete list with affiliation and areas of expertise. As I've said before, we have an excellent SSC that provides excellent support to the council under the excellent leadership of Paul Rago. So that's a lot of excellence, but we're really lucky to have these folks. And I want to personally thank them for their service to the council and to the Mid-Atlantic fisheries that provide the information for. Unless there's any questions there, the next item behind the tab is an email exchange between John Carmichael and me regarding the removal of Mid-Atlantic members from a number of South Atlantic committees. So I provided this email exchange to you all earlier. I said we were going to talk about it at this meeting. So here we are, talk about it today. I don't have anything to add. You see the response that I got from John Carmichael regarding my question of why those folks were removed. They've all been notified that they've been removed from those committees, and we will continue to talk about it. We have an agenda item at the upcoming NRCC meeting where we'll address council committees, membership of council committees, and how best to organize those committees to allow for exchange between the various councils. So that's something that we plan to do. And with that, I'll stop there and see if there are any comments or questions about that particular topic today. Yes, Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I mean, I do certainly have some concerns. You know, a lot of work was put into the climate scenario planning, and you know, through that we tried to eliminate ideas that would make coastal management more of a thing that would also require Magnuson adjustments. And one of the things that we talked about that is doable is the idea of councils working together in this fashion of, you know, maybe liaison voting and having more interactions at this level. So I think this is unfortunate and an unfortunate time as well for this to happen.
Anna.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I was disappointed by the news. I think that there are a number of topics that the South Atlantic is working on that certainly should matter to us. You know, Mahi in particular is you know, one that I think there's going to be some movement on that would particularly interest us. They have had plenty of discussions on private angler reporting and some limited entry conversations that I think are worth listening to and being at the table for, as they can inform some of the discussions that we'll be having in the future. So not to say that a liaison can't represent us, but I think it is a lot of information for one person to be completely on the ball with, to be able to speak across all of the topics. So I did like the idea of having some committee representation where you could really dig into those topics and be prepared to speak on them in a more in-depth way than I think one liaison individual should be capable and responsible of doing. So that's just my general feelings. Thanks.
Thank you. Chris Savage.
Thanks, Chris. And yeah, I share the same concerns and thoughts that Joe and Anna have. A couple quick questions, and I have a couple comments. Chris, they mentioned that there's no South Atlantic Council members on our committees. Has South Atlantic Council ever showed any interest in serving on any of our committees? And if they did, we would accommodate that, right?
Yeah. Yes, we would. I do not remember any request from the South Atlantic Council to have members serve on any of our committees. Certainly we have a liaison, Jimmy's here today, that attends our meetings, but in that particular request, no. So we don't have committees that have South Atlantic Council members on them currently.
Thanks for that. And I'm glad that this is going to be discussed further at the NRCC meeting and maybe some other venues. Maybe a suggestion is, if there's any interest in South Atlantic Council members serving on like our Bluefish Committee, for instance, to offer that, and also definitely have them reconsider removing our members from at least committees that have species management ranges into the Mid-Atlantic, such as mackerel cobia and dolphin wahoo. I think it's important to have council membership on those committees. And just the last point to the email exchange, they're allowing AP members from the Mid-Atlantic to still serve. But I think we all know that AP members fill a very different role than committee members, and one really doesn't replace the other. So I just hope the South Atlantic Council maybe thinks about this a little more and reconsiders this decision. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Joe Gress.
Thank you, Chris. Joe, Anna's, and Chris's comments mirror probably what I was going to say. Understandably, I'm very disappointed in this action by South Atlantic Council, that I've worked with off and on in my career. Was pretty taken aback by this maneuver. Our state, especially Virginia, Maryland, are very much engaged, especially say the mackerel issue. They just ran port meetings all the way up to New England. So this measure, it just makes no sense to me whatsoever. But I do want to say thank you to you, Chris, and the staff, because late last year, we ran into a situation before we knew this was going to happen, that we had overlapping council meetings. And because our representation on South Atlantic Council is so important to so many of us, because it's impacting our fisheries as well, what they decide, you moved 2 meetings to accommodate us. And now it's for nothing. And, that also doesn't set well with me, because we've been accommodating as well. And if they had ever wanted to be on our committees, I don't think any of us would have said no. But I want to thank you, Chris, and the staff for what y'all at least attempted to do in the era of cooperation. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Joe. Michelle.
I'll echo some of the things that Chris Savage and Anna mentioned. And thank Jimmy for being here. I know the liaison role isn't always that easy either. And I think perhaps something, just at the NRCC to consider as this discussion moves forward, is, perhaps there are some standard considerations for inclusion of other council members on other council committees, like, where is the management unit? I mean, there are, Chris mentioned Bluefish, which is obviously Maine through Florida. It's a very important fishery off Florida. And so certainly it would make sense for, someone from the southern part of the range, or, even a couple folks to serve on that committee. I think, mackerel, squid, butterfish also runs the length of the coast, but I think, the fishery doesn't very often extend, below North Carolina. So I think maybe some conversation about, fishery management units. I mean, the snapper grouper FMU does not extend above the North Carolina Virginia border, but there are a lot of snapper grouper landings that are starting to have been happening, even over the past 10 years up into the mid-Atlantic, England. And so I think thinking about those things and taking those into consideration when discussing committee representation would be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. So the committee member from the New England Fishery Management Council on the Dolphin Wahoo Committee also had their voting rights stripped from them, and we share the concerns that the Mid-Atlantic Council has, and that how that complicates the management, and feel like we're a little underrepresented in that fishery right now. They do extend all the way up to Maine, so we always valued that position and found it helpful. We thought we contributed pretty well to that committee, and hopefully through the NRCC, we can come up with some sort of a solution that works. Looking forward to that. Thanks.
Thank you, Sonny.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Yeah, and I'm agreeing with all the comments. With what we're seeing on the water, we need this representation, and I don't think one liaison would be compatible to what we need. Thanks.
Thank you. We have Tom Newman online. Tom. Tom, you're muted on your end, so you have to unmute yourself. Tom. Tom, I don't know if you can hear me now, but yeah, you'll have to unmute yourself. We'll move on and then get back to you and after you resolve your issue with.
Yeah, so I'm sorry.
Oh, there you are.
Can you hear me? Yeah, update. I had to reopen my microphone. But my name's Thomas Newman. I work with the North Carolina Fisheries Association, full-time commercial fisherman. But I'm also, I've just recently been voted chair for the mackerel cobia AP at South Atlantic. And I just want y'all to keep strong on this issue, because if we don't start jointly managing these fisheries, we're going to lose what we got. You've got more NEMAP data on Spanish mackerel than what the CMAP has over the last 2 or 3 years. And we have to start working together. The science centers have to talk from the Northeast and the Southeast. All of our fisheries are moving north. Y'all, like I say, y'all keep up the good fight, because you do need more representation at the South Atlantic Council, and vice versa. It's fish don't live in a box, and we have proven that time and time again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Any other comments before we move on? Okay, seeing none. The last item behind the executive director's tab is something new. We saw the first version of this at the last meeting. It's a PR newsletter that Hayden puts together for us, entitled Protected Resources Pulse. A number of items in there to take a look at when you get a chance. Just a couple things to highlight. There will be a Gear Marking Framework PDT FMAP meeting on April 28th. Also, there's a journal article that Hayden would like you to take a look at if you have a chance. The article explains lessons learned through on-demand gear trials in the New England lobster fisheries from 2020 to 2023. And that particular article could provide useful information for future council discussions about the year marking framework. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm done. Certainly take any comments or questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Seeing no hands. To move on to our organizational reports. GARFO Report, Mike Penny.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. A few items. On March 18th, we published a proposed rule for Framework 39 to the Scallop FMP. This would set specifications and other measures for fishing years 2025 and 2026. The fishing year began April 1st. The comment period closed on that proposed rule last week on April 2nd. And so when the fishery opened on April 1st, it opened under default specifications, and we're working to get the final rule implemented as soon as possible, which would then replace the default specifications with those in the Framework 39 final rule. On March 26th, we published a proposed rule for 2025 spiny dogfish specifications, consistent with the recommendations of both Mid-Atlantic and New England councils. The comment period closes on that today, on the 10th. So get your last minute comments in. On April 1st, we published a proposed rule for the 2025 blue line tilefish and 2025 through 2027 golden tilefish specifications, also consistent with the recommendations of the Mid-Atlantic Council. Comment period closes next week on April 16th. And then second to last, on April 3rd, we published a proposed rule to set the 2025 recreational management measures for the black sea bass fishery. This proposed conservation equivalency is recommended by the Mid-Atlantic Council, and the comment period closes on April 18th. And then lastly, we published a final rule on April 7th, and it's effective May 7th, for the 2025 monkfish specifications. And these were consistent with Mid-Atlantic and New England Council recommendations, and they're effectively a rollover from 2024, so no changes to last year's measures. That's all I have, but I'll take questions.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions? Sonny, you can close your mic too.
Thank you.
Seeing none, let's move on to the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. Dr. John Hare.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Sorry I'm not there with you all in person. My report should be relatively quick. We have had staff reductions at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center so far this year. And currently the agency has an early retirement and voluntary separation incentive option, which closes April 17th. Once we have an understanding of how many more departures we will have from the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, we'll assess our staff capacity and evaluate what science we can complete in 2025. And we'll then work with the regional office and be reaching out to the executive director at the Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Management Council to sort of talk through potential changes in our survey and assessment schedule because of our reduced staffing. The spring bottom trawl survey is underway on Bigelow. They have completed all of the Mid-Atlantic, Bight, and Southern New England area and are starting to sample on to Georges Bank and in the Gulf of Maine. We do anticipate completing this survey in May. Northeast Fisheries Observer Program, NEFSC, they completed their fishing year 24 coverage requirements for their fisheries observing. They were a little short in terms of their Marine Mammal Protection Act and ESA coverage, but in terms of the fisheries coverage, they met those requirements. In terms of our stock assessments, we had a management track community input for our June 2026 management tracks in February of 2025. The Northeast Fisheries Science Center will consider this information in the development of those management tracks in 2026, and we'll also use it to sort of evaluate our research plans for the coming year. The assessment oversight panel met in February and looked at sort of the level of review for the stock assessments where the peer reviews will happen in June of this year. These stock assessments are for the Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Management Council managed species. And the assessment oversight panel decided that northern short fin squid would have a level 1 assessment, black sea bass, bluefish, scup, and silver flounder would have a level 2 assessment, and Atlantic mackerel would have a level 3 assessment. And these levels pertain to the sort of the amount of the review that the assessments are expected, and also the amount of material provided in the assessments. We have, we did complete our Atlantic herring research track assessment, successfully completing all terms of reference in March, and that will be discussed at the upcoming New England Council meeting next week. And our Atlantic scallop research track assessment is nearing conclusion with the peer review on April 21st to 24th. There have been numerous sightings of North Atlantic right whales in the Mid-Atlantic from February till today. And these, well, sightings, detections, I really should say. These detections have both been by aerial surveys and from the network of near real-time passive acoustic moorings, which are being deployed coastwide as part of our Inflation Reduction Act activities. In terms of calving this year, there have been 10 calves, North Atlantic right whale calves so far, which is better than some years, but not as good as other years. Just to give you an idea, in 2018, there were 0 calves, 2019, 7 calves, 2020, 10 calves, 2021, 20 calves, 2022, 15 calves, 2023, 12 calves, 2024, 20 calves, and 10 calves so far in 2025. So it's good that calves are being produced. That will certainly help the species recover. We also continue to work with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, and wind developers in putting together a regional survey mitigation framework. Those efforts are ongoing, and we'll continue to report on those as we go forward. You did hear a lot at this meeting from our Ecosystem Dynamics and Assessment Branch. The report, Sarah Geitis gave an excellent report on the state of the ecosystem report. And then there was the Brandon and others, the council sort of presented the risk assessment integration, how the state of the ecosystem linked to that. Our group also continues to work on ecosystem and socioeconomic profiles, currently developing them for the longfin squid research track. So that's my report, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, John. Any questions for John? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Go on to NOAA Office of General Counsel, John Almeida.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This meeting's report from General Counsel is going to be pretty brief. Only a couple of cases to report on. I'll start with the Lofstad case. You may recall this is an appointments clause challenge to the Mid-Atlantic Council's recreational commercial allocation amendment. The case was entirely about the appointments clause, a constitutional challenge to the Magnuson-Stevens Act and the council process. You may recall that we've received a favorable ruling in the district court, and the plaintiffs pursued an appeal in the Third Circuit. The Third Circuit reversed the district court and sent it back to the district court. This week, the district court issued an order implementing the mandate of the Third Circuit, which, what that means is it's the end of the case. This is the last report I'll have on the Lofstad case. The other appointments clause case of interest to this council is probably the New England Fishermen's Stewardship Association case that was filed in the District of Maine that challenged the New England Council's Groundfish Framework 65. I believe I reported at the last meeting, the district court issued a decision on the parties' cross motions for summary judgment. And the ruling in that case was very similar to the way the Third Circuit ruled in Lofstad. Like in Lofstad, the court found that two provisions of the Magnuson-Stevens Act that would provide the councils with the ability to prevent the Secretary of Commerce from acting without council approval would run afoul of the Appointments Clause. And like the Lofstad case, the Maine court severed these provisions from the statute, and by doing so, found that the councils no longer had significant authority that would raise Appointments Clause concerns. And those two provisions were 304C3, which would require council approval for the secretary to pursue limited access programs, and 304H, which would require three-quarter council vote for the council for the secretary to repeal or revoke an FMP. At this point, both the plaintiffs and the defendants have filed notices of appeal in the First Circuit, and it looks like the appeals will be briefed this spring and summer. So we'll see how that plays out in the First Circuit. The other case I'm going to report on is the Massachusetts Lobstermen's Association case. You may recall this was filed in the District of Massachusetts by the Massachusetts Lobstermen's Association that in a challenge to the MMPA rule that would close a wedge area, seasonal closure to fix gear off the coast of Massachusetts. This case moved very quickly through the district court and went up to the First Circuit. NIMS appealed to the First Circuit, and earlier this year, the First Circuit ruled in favor of NIMS, reversed the district court, finding that the wedge rule, basically that the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2023 did provide NIMS with the authority to issue this rule. So the case has been sent back to the district court from the First Circuit. It's unclear how it's going to proceed from there, from this point forward, but at this point it's back in the district court. And that's all I have to report. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Questions from anyone? Comments from anyone? Seeing none, thank you very much, John. Let's go to the U.S. Coast Guard, Lieutenant Commander Joshua Moon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My report is not as brief, but is relatively brief. It covers beginning of February through the end of March. During this period, we conducted 16 fisheries boardings. Weather is historically challenging during this period, and is one of the main reasons why we do not get as many boardings as we typically do. As I said, 16 boardings, we had one fisheries violation. That violation was in the middle to the end of February. Station Oregon Inlet issued an enforcement action report to a wreck fishing vessel for fishing for tuna without a permit. Additionally, we had one marine protected species support where Sector Delaware Bay conducted a call out to a vessel exceeding the speed restriction within the right whale speed restriction area. And that is in support of our upright speed operation that runs through the end of April. We only had that one call out. Additionally, we wrapped up our Op Stars and Stripers, which targets vessels fishing for Atlantic striped bass in the EEZ off of New Jersey through Virginia. For commercial fishing vessel safety efforts, we conducted 108 dockside exams, issued 107 decals, and had 3 commercial fishing vessel safety terminations. There were 6 reported marine casualties during the period of February 1 through the 31st of March. There were 2 flooding cases on the 9th of February. Sector Delaware Bay received notification from the fishing vessel Lady Roslyn that they were taking on water at the Atlantic Cape Fisheries Pier. Station Cape May investigated to ensure no sheeting was occurring and there was no waterway impact was observed. Also on the 20th of February, Sector Maryland National Capital Region received a call from the Queen Anne County Dispatch of a distress call from a 40-foot commercial oyster boat taking on water near Prospect Bay, Maryland. The vessel ran into a chunk of ice that created a hole in the keel. Station Annapolis and Graysonville Fire Department responded and escorted the vessel to Sandy's Marine to be lifted out and to effect repairs. There is one reported marine casualty for a loss of propulsion or steering. On the 9th of March, Sector North Carolina received notification that fishing vessel Miss Jane was disabled due to engine and fuel issues. Station Wrightsville Beach responded, took the vessel in tow, and moored them safely at Bridge Tender Marina. And then we had 3 terminations. As I said earlier, on the 11th of March, Sector Delaware Bay received notification that the Coast Guard cutter Heron boarding team had discovered that the fishing vessel Bear had no life preservers on board and requested to terminate the voyage. The sector approved the termination and the vessel was escorted to the pier. Upon further investigation with the commercial fishing vessel examiner, the vessel had immersion suits on board and training was conducted for the Coast Guard cutter Heron to prevent further issues. On the 17th of March, Sector North Carolina received notification from Station Elizabeth City boarding team that they had discovered that a fishing vessel had no firefighting equipment on board. Sector North Carolina approved the termination and the vessel was escorted to the pier. And then on the 19th of March, Sector Maryland received notification from Station Crisfield boarding team that they had discovered several safety violations on the fishing vessel's Second Chance and requested to terminate the voyage. The violations were they had no flares, no immersion suits, no radio, had no current safety exam, and only had one serviceable fire extinguisher and no life raft. Sector Maryland approved the termination and the station escorted the vessel to the pier. District 5 continues to do outreach for commercial fishing vessel safety. D5 units continue these efforts through dockside walks, training, and through educational efforts. And we are still conducting commercial fishing vessel safety trainings throughout the area. Pending other questions, that is all I have from the Coast Guard.
That wasn't very long at all. Any comments, questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Oh, and also, you don't need the buoy tender to drag the whale out. He came off on his own the other day.
Yeah, I saw that the wind just pushed him right off.
It did. All right, let's move on to our liaison reports. I bet you the New England report's going to be very short.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No report. The meeting's next week.
All right, Jimmy, see if you can beat that. Let's go with the South Atlantic Council report. Jimmy Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all council leadership and council members for inviting me here. I've interacted with many of you and have made new friends and have learned a lot to take back with me. So the South Atlantic Fisheries Management Council update. The South Atlantic Fisheries Management Council met in Jekyll Island, Georgia on March 3rd through the 7th, 2025. And here are some of the discussions and decisions. The advisory panel meetings. The council reviewed and approved topics for the spring meetings of its snapper grouper, mackerel cobia, and dolphin wahoo advisory panels, and for the July 2025 meeting of its habitat and ecosystem advisory panel. Habitat and ecosystem. The council approved submitting a letter to the National Marine Fisheries Service detailing proposed modifications to essential fish habitat to fulfill the EFH 5-year review. Committee membership. The council discussed representation from adjacent councils on committees. Representatives of the Mid-Atlantic and New England Fishery Management Councils serve as members on some committees, but there is no committee representation from the Gulf Council. Both the Mid-Atlantic and Gulf Councils are represented at each South Atlantic Council meeting by liaisons. On the other hand, the South Atlantic Council does not have representation on any committees of other councils. Therefore, the council is discontinuing committee membership for representatives of the Mid-Atlantic and New England councils on South Atlantic Council committees. Input on fisheries issues from adjacent councils will continue to be provided through designated representation on advisory panels. Because the New England Council does not have a liaison to the South Atlantic Council, the New England representative on the Dolphin Wahoo Committee will be converted to a non-voting liaison position. These changes will be effective in June 2025. Climate readiness projects. NOAA has provided funding to support council efforts to develop and advance climate-ready fisheries management. The council's climate readiness projects coordinator gave a presentation including background information and updates on the council's climate readiness projects. For-hire reporting improvement amendment. The council received feedback from its for-hire reporting and law enforcement advisory panels on potential actions to improve for-hire reporting in the South Atlantic region. Macrocobia. In 2024, at the urging of their Macrocobia advisory panel, the council hosted a series of 16 in-person and 6 virtual port meetings along the Atlantic coast to obtain additional information from participants in the Atlantic king mackerel and Atlantic Spanish mackerel fisheries. Port meeting attendees discussed their perspectives from other fishery participants and local council members. Council staff reviewed the draft report from its effort and provided options for moving forward with the development of management actions. CDAR committee charge and name modification. The committee revised the charge for the Southeast Data Assessment Review, CDAR committee, to encompass the review of schedules and terms of reference for various methods to develop advice for assessing stocks. The council added data collection into the committee's charge, which will benefit discussions related to data collection, such as a standard bycatch reporting methodology review. The committee's name was also changed to the Data Assessment and Catch Advice Committee. Snapper Grouper amendments. Snapper Grouper Management Unit revision. The council acknowledged the need to reduce the number of species in the Snapper Grouper Fisheries Management Unit, or FMU. There are currently 55 species in the FMU, of which approximately 15 have undergone a stock assessment. The council selected stocks that must remain in the FMU for reasons of overfishing, etc., and those that would require further evaluation to determine the need for conservation and management under federal fisheries management plans. Commercial fishery management. The Commercial Snapper Grouper Subcommittee discussed the prioritization actions to explore in an amendment to the Snapper Grouper Fishery Management Plan that would address the needs of the commercial fishery. The council approved initiating the amendment to revise the 2-for-1 permit policy for unlimited permits and to increase trip efficiency. The subcommittee will be convened again in June 25 to develop this amendment. Secretarial amendment to end overfishing of red snapper, Amendment 59. The NOAA Fisheries Southeast Regional Office presented information on Amendment 59 to the Snapper Grouper Fishery Management Plan to end overfishing of South Atlantic red snapper and reduce dead discards. The council's feedback and recommendations will be submitted to NOAA Fisheries by March 17th of 2025, and that is available. Black sea bass, Amendment 56. Amendment 56 responds to the results of the most recent South Atlantic Black Sea Bass Stock Assessment, CDAR 76, which indicated that the population is depleted. The council reviewed scoping comments and revised the list of actions to include many bullet point actions on this amendment. Private recreational permit and education requirements, Amendment 46. Amendment 46 considers establishing a private recreational permit and education requirement for the South Atlantic Snapper Grouper fishery. The council continued to move forward with this amendment, discussing ways to potentially allow states to be exempt from the federal permit and education requirement. State directors on the council intend to further discuss the National Marine Fisheries Service, the specifications of such an exemption. Golden tilefish amendment. The CDAR 89 stock assessment for South Atlantic golden tilefish was completed in 2024, indicating that the stock is not overfished and not experiencing overfishing. The council decided to develop actions to address updated catch levels to be consistent with the Science and Statistical Committee's most recent recommendations and consider changing the recreational season start date. Updating catch levels will be addressed through an abbreviated framework to the snapper group or fisheries management plan. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jimmy. Glad you're here. Any questions? Comments? Seeing none, thank you. Now we have to backtrack a little bit because somehow I forgot Caleb. So let's go back to NOAA Office of Law Enforcement. Caleb Gilbert.
I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you sound fine.
All right. Good morning to you, sir. Good morning, council members. Sorry I can't be there in person. I wish I was. I realize I'm last now, so I will try to get through my report efficiently. I have a few details I'd like to cover. Starting with I'd like to let you all know that our OLE in the Northeast Division began leadership transition last quarter. Former Assistant Director Mike Henry retired on February after 23 years of service to OLE and actually 4 years of Border Patrol work in the Southwest before that. I'm not sure who all here, the council, had the opportunity to work with Mike, but he was our Assistant Director for 2 years, served many different roles within NED in his time here, and he'll be sorely missed. By not just myself, but our Deputy Special Agent in Charge, James Casson, is filling in the Acting Assistant Director role currently, and our D1, that's our more northern division, Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Troy Audietis, is our interim or acting DSAC. And as you are likely aware, outside of leadership personnel changes, there have been a few retirements and pending retirements within NED recently. We don't expect this to impact our ability to perform our mission in any capacity. As I'll share with you today, our Q2, that's January through March, fiscal year 2025 enforcement work has been highly productive. Our casework alone illustrates an increase to 194 cases started in the Q2. That's up from 176 cases we initiated in the previous quarter. Our North Atlantic right whale conservation and enforcement work, as well as our efforts to support our Northeast Fisheries Observer Program partners, continue. The most noteworthy highlight I want to share today is the emphasis OLE is placed on trade enforcement, particularly in NED. Trade enforcement basically means all of our collective work to identify seafood import monitoring program and IUU related fishing violations. We dramatically stepped up our related work in the last quarter, January through March. Specifically, that work includes conducting inspections and operations involving cargo, ship, container inspections, as well as patrols and inspections of various land-based facilities and businesses, federal trade permit holders, all involving SIMP and IUU seafood commerce, even airports. So in summary, I plan to cover details on our right whale enforcement efforts today and our observer program support work, and then cover a few details of our enhanced trade enforcement work in the last quarter. I'm hoping the council finds the trade enforcement information valuable as it relates to our work leveling the playing field. Our focus on improved compliance of international seafood commerce positively impacts seafood domestic production commerce. And I also have an update on our blue line tilefish enforcement work I can share with the council today before taking any questions folks might have of us. So starting on our speed rule enforcement work related to our right whale conservation efforts, just to reiterate, we have basically two prongs of our enforcement work related to North Atlantic right whale conservation: speed rule enforcement to avoid ship strikes, and then gear work to avoid negative gear interactions. So starting with speed enforcement work, OLE D2, that's our southern area division covering waters off Virginia up through New York. Enforcement officers participated in 13 speed rule focused patrols so far this seasonal management area season, going back to November 1st of last year. Those have all been so far in the New York Bight and Delaware Bay SMAs, alongside New York and Delaware State JEA partners, respectively. U.S. Coast Guard D5 partnered with us on some of these as well. Some of these patrols as well, as Lieutenant Commander Ramon, I believe, mentioned a little while ago. One of those patrols involved a D2 EO enforcement officer and special agent coordinating a 7-hour SMA patrol to locate a mother and calf right whale pair observed in an aerial survey at the time near New York City. While they didn't locate the whales, the observed speed rule compliance on that patrol and all others has been very high. So that's the point I wanted to make. Compliance has been very high on those patrols. Our speed rule related casework continues steadily as well. But moving on onto our GEAR, or Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Plan focused conservation and enforcement efforts. This may be a little bit less interest to the council, as those typically center around the Northeast or D1 AOR, but correspondingly last quarter, our D1 EOs participated with main JEA partners on joint patrols to fix gear for take reduction plan compliance. Additionally, related to right whale conservation enforcement, our investigative support team staff continue to place geofences around presence of North Atlantic right whales. Since the middle of December, we set up 23 geofences, resulting in over 1,300 messages sent to VMS-equipped vessels, and we sent 242 last week. The last whale update I'll mention is a D2 EO did provide compliance assistance to one fisherman for white whale approach distance requirements under the ESA in the last quarter. He was within the 500-yard minimum approach distance required. Well, let's see. Actually, that was last December. I apologize. But moving on to our efforts to support NEFOP. Many of our staff contribute to this effort. I'll just mention our observer program liaisons, special agent who leads our effort, participated in another at-sea monitor training and observer support panel that was in March. And our investigative support team also provided support to a couple more vessels carrying observers last month, reported to us by NEFOP that they were experiencing an emergency at sea. And we placed both vessels on 5-minute VMS reporting. And I was told all crew and observers made it back safely to shore on those trips. Getting back to our enhanced effort on trade enforcement work I mentioned earlier, I promise I'm getting close here. We stepped that up to at least 38 related cases last quarter. I haven't finished going over all of our case production data, that may be more, but for reference, in the first quarter, FY25, we initiated 13 related cases, and I think that was an above average quarter for us. And there's a couple of trade enforcement cases that have closed that I'll try to report on quickly. One that I'll start with, special agent in our D2 initiated in June of 23 and closed last February, involving a foreign-based grocery store chain that was accused of importing tuna harvested from a vessel sailing under an embargoed country's flag. The special agent, along with our JEA and U.S. Custom Border Patrol officers, inventoried the product and ultimately prevented the shipment from entering U.S. commerce, subjected a over $12,000 NOVA fine, in addition to the loss of almost $10,000 in declared product value. So, if not all of our trade enforcement cases we started last quarter involve laws under OLE's jurisdiction. Those cases are all ongoing, I believe, so I can't say anything about them. But a couple have closed where we referred them to our federal enforcement partners, as the species or products involved in a violation were not under our jurisdiction. Those illegally traded products not under our jurisdiction involved a regulated drug, undeclared snails, unlicensed jellyfish, even counterfeit sneakers. And I only mention this, we often get reports from those same enforcement partners of seafood products under our jurisdiction that they discover while conducting their inspections. So we also work jointly with those federal enforcement partners on our trade enforcement efforts. Sorry for that extra detail. I thought those might help frame for the council the scope of our trade enforcement work. The last point I'll mention on that is we conducted roughly 50 trade enforcement inspections last quarter. I don't have specific metrics to help you put that in perspective, but that is a very significant increase in the number of related inspections we conducted per quarter over the last couple of years. So blue line tilefish, as I promised, not much to report, but EO closed a referral from New Jersey state enforcement last February for a boat that possessed blue line tilefish without a permit. He was issued a written warning for the violation. We don't have any other recreational blue line tilefish enforcement work to report, but on the commercial side, one of our D2 enforcement officers inspected 3 trips last quarter involving blue line landings on Long Island and found no violations. And that is all I have to report. Sorry, that was a little bit long, Mr. Chairman, but I know folks probably get itching to leave, but I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. And I didn't forget to save the best for last.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions, comments? Eric Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. It'll be a brief question and I'm not going to get an answer to. It's fine. So since Mr. Gilbert is talking about international trade, my question is, because squid is not considered a seafood item, will it be exempt from any tariffs on seafood? Thanks.
No, you're right, Eric. I don't have an answer for you, but I'll work on it.
Seeing no more hands. Thank you, Caleb.
No problem.
Let's get to other business and general public comment. Do we have anything else to bring before us today? Chris?
So I just received, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just received the council nomination list. So you're going to see it here shortly as soon as I push this button. So you can take a look. It's something we get from National Marine Fisheries Service, and just scroll through it. You can see the list of folks that are on that list. Thanks.
Seeing no more hands. I want to thank council staff again. You guys did a great job as always, all presenters this week. And that concludes our meeting, our April meeting. See everyone in Virginia Beach in June. Bye-bye.